This episode of Unqualified Opinions is brought to you by Hirechain. Your next hire could come from anywhere: a recruiter, a job board, a referral network, or a conference. Hirechain manages hundreds of candidate sources for you, so you only see relevant applications and can focus on picking the best person for your team. On average, our customers fill open roles faster and 30% cheaper than with traditional recruiters. Leading companies like The Graph and Masari already use Hirechain. So get your time back. Talk to Hirechain today and hire the best, fast. Visit hirechain.io/Masari for prioritized onboarding. This podcast is meant for informational purposes only and is not meant to serve as investment advice. Hosts and guests may hold cryptocurrencies discussed in this episode. Opinions expressed may not reflect the opinions of Masari.
No, we don't actually know Nate Silver, and we didn't even try to reach out to him for this podcast, so we don't really know why he joined Polymarket's advisory board last month. But when you look at how Polymarket has been performing this summer, it's not hard to see what may have attracted him. Polymarket has been growing at a breakneck pace ever since coverage of the US election heated up. But that's not a surprise. Kunal predicted this on this very podcast 2 months ago. Traffic, search interest, volumes will almost certainly drop off after the election is over, but by how much is the question. I dove deep into Polymarket and can now tell you how strong their non-politics volumes are performing, where volumes might settle after the election, and what the risks are that might wipe away all of this summer's success. I'm Sunny Shi, and here's the story.
Join us at Mainnet 2024, Masari's premier annual conference in NYC from September 30th through October 2nd. Don't miss the exclusive opportunity to engage with industry leaders like Katie Hahn, Bizer Dimitrov, and Hester Peirce. Explore emerging trends in crypto and AI, and network with top investors and innovators. Benefit from a 20% discount with code MasariPod when you register at mainnet.events. For a prominent presence, contact events@masari.io. Experience the future of crypto at Mainnet 2024.
Sunny, great to have you on the pod today.
Thank you. Very great to be on.
Polymarket has been getting a lot of attention. Especially with the U.S. election coming up, there's been a lot of speculation around that. But first things first, could you talk to people about what Polymarket is and what is unique about it versus other prediction markets?
Yes, absolutely. So Polymarket is a prediction market on Polygon. And the platform allows speculators to trade the probabilities of different real-world outcomes across Polymarket's many different markets. And so the most popular market to date has been the election market, which you mentioned. And that has seen hundreds of millions of dollars of volume from traders trying to predict who will be the US president in 2025. Now, in terms of what is unique about Polymarket, I wouldn't say that its design is too different from any of the other prediction markets that we've seen in the past. But we really haven't seen anything that has been able to achieve Polymarket's level of scale and growth. And so it isn't really about doing anything different. It's really about doing everything really well, from marketing, UI, UX, and incentivizing the liquidity to make it all happen.
So tell me about some of these crazy numbers, right? What are the highlights from the last few months?
Yeah, so Polymarket's metrics have really just been up and to the right. And most recently in June and July, I think we've really seen remarkable levels of growth. As of the end of July, open interest is up over 9x to 87 million year to date, and monthly volumes are up over 6x to 387 million, which is now more volume on a monthly basis than top dexes like SushiSwap and TraderJet. Attention for the platform has really surged as well, with Google's search interest, both in the US and globally, now higher than that of popular decentralized exchange Uniswap. And June and July saw 100,000 new account sign-ons, which is really, really impressive.
So how much of the volume has actually been election related? Is first part of my question, and second part of the question is, how many of these people are going to stick around, right? What happens if the election is over, right? Does that mean that Polymarket is toast?
Yeah, those are really good questions, and I think those are probably the questions of interest right now. So let's attack, how much of current metrics are driven by the election. And it's impossible to really say for sure, but one thing that I tried to do is I took a look at active Polymarket markets doing over 1 million in notional volume. Polymarket reports notional volume on their website, which is slightly overstated versus real market volumes. But when we look at that number, election-driven markets account for 94% of that volume, which is a very significant amount. Um, but I guess the question is, what's happening everywhere else? I think when you look at Dune Analytics dashboards that show the real-time month-to-month split in market volumes from election markets versus non-election markets, non-election volumes have actually grown at quite a healthy pace to the tune of 113% month over month since January. There are some interesting markets as well that have nothing to do with the election in the top 20. These include markets on the Olympics, the Venezuelan election, and also Fed fund rates. And it's impossible to predict exactly what happens from here. But if non-election markets can grow volumes at just a 25% month over month pace, which is markedly lower than current growth rates, by December, we estimate that Polymarket can still do almost 400 million in volumes um, just from non-election related markets. And that would be right around what it did in July. We don't think that this growth will be linear, but we think that a 25% growth rate accounts for some slowdown from here while still projecting healthy expansion as we head into the election in November.
So if we were to break that down, right? Where what is your growth thesis in terms of where the growth is going to be coming from?
Yeah, so I think looking at long-term growth, there are a couple of potential drivers that we find really interesting, and I'll highlight really four main things that I think are important. The first is really just on basic product innovation. There hasn't really been much innovation that has occurred um, over general prediction market infrastructure. And I think new features like leverage and parlays in general can expand Polymarket's addressable market going forward. Um, I think secondly, new integrations are also a key thing to watch out for. Polymarket has already established an existing relationship with Farcaster Frames, which improves the platform's mobile UI. And most recently, the platform partnered with AI search engine Perplexity, which makes the data more accessible and useful. We also think that funding rounds, like the ones that Polymarket have recently pursued, can increase Polymarket's overall capital base, allowing it to more aggressively invest in new growth initiatives. And lastly, one of the more interesting aspects of where prediction markets could eventually trend towards, I think there is a chance that we see prediction more heavily financialized by institutional investors and individual investors globally. And what I mean by that is, many of Polymarket's different markets and outcomes offer a source of mitigation, protection, and hedging against severe global black swan events. And an example I provided in the report is the market that Polymarket already has out, which is whether China will invade Taiwan in 2024. If that does resolve as true, that would be disastrous for a number of different publicly traded companies and securities that are heavily exposed to the semiconductor supply chain. And so if, as an investor, if you want to hedge for that potential outcome, perhaps you can do so on Polymarket's platform going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and super interesting. Um, Now, the flip side. What are some of the risks here?
Yeah, I think that's always important to address. And probably the most notable risk that we've seen in the near term is that new competition has really intensified over the last month or so. And so a number of different offerings have been announced by different parties across crypto, like Drift on Solana, potential developers on Ton, Mega ETH, and new emerging platforms or new emerging blockchains like Say. And these competitors can take share by offering new markets, incentives, and maybe even new features that are currently not on Polymarket. It should also be noted here that Polymarket is on Polygon and is thus somewhat tied to the success of Polygon as an ecosystem. And so competitors on other blockchains can stand to benefit if their local chain sees outsized growth and attention. But I think in mitigation here, Polymarket already has an established brand and reputation. Just looking at the protocol's Twitter account, you can see that it is the most widely followed prediction market application. And that poses a number of attractive advantages over new competitors going forward. Another risk that should be explored is that Polymarket has spent over $3 million year to date incentivizing market makers. And if these incentives die down, it might become a lot harder for Polymarket to provide sufficient liquidity depth on their platform. I should note that this is a problem for all prediction markets. And Polymarket does have the benefit of having a larger balance sheet from several funding rounds, as we mentioned earlier. We also think that if Polymarket decides to increase fees on the platform, incentivizing market makers in perpetuity becomes a lot more feasible. Lastly, Kyle Samani from Multicoin Capital has highlighted something that prediction markets across the board need to address, which is the need for recurring lifetime value from users. And right now, many of Polymarket's top markets won't be resolved for many, many months. And so Polymarket would need to consistently create new markets that are interesting, perhaps shorter lived, to continue to keep traders engaged. We believe that this represents a source of execution risk, and Polymarket would probably need to address this going forward.
Yeah. Sunny, this was great. Thanks very much.
Of course, anytime. This episode was produced by Steve Bichimer based on the report Yes or No on Polymarket, written for Messari Pro by me in August 2024. To learn more about Polymarket, please consider subscribing to Messari Pro at messari.io.